Wir kommen nun zu einem Impuls, good or not so good. Und der Impuls wird auf Englisch sein und die Person kann heute leider nicht anwesend sein, aber das macht ja nichts in diesem digitalen Zeitalter. Die Person wird eingeschaltet. Und zwar ist es Ruben Pater und er wird einen Impuls über genau die Frage good or not so good zu dem Thema halten. Und er arbeitet zwischen Journalismus und Grafikdesign und er selbst beschäftigt sich mit Themen wie Gerechtigkeit, Gleichheit, Solidarität. Und manchmal denkt man, er ist vielleicht eher ein Designkritiker, als dass er nur Designschaffender ist, aber er bewegt sich irgendwie zwischendrin und ich freue mich, dass er da ist und vielleicht können wir ihn direkt schon einblenden. Ruben, hi, nice to meet you, great that you're here, kind of. Welcome. Great. So, since we have already introduced you, I would just give the audience a few more information because afterwards, after you gave your impulse, there will be the possibility for all of you to ask questions. The microphone will be handed around, and in case you have a question for Ruben, you might be able to ask. Well, Ruben, the stage is yours. We're so excited you're here. Start with your presentation. We're ready.
I'm going to share my screen now, do the whole thing. All right, so thank you so much for inviting me for this short impulse here. Yeah, because the was is good, was is nicht good. So hopefully I'm not reiterating like similar arguments. For me, it's like less interesting to talk about aesthetic, what is good conceptually, but maybe about the whole idea of
recording in progress.
What design, good design might be, right? You are in an award show. This is kind of important. So usually we end up with, of course, the exhibition at the MoMA in 1950 called Good Design. So I think many of you will know this exhibition. This was important because this was the moment when modernist furniture from people like the Eames couple was actually brought to the large audience, and this kind of design that of course already existed and during the Bauhaus era actually was brought to a broader audience. So that was seen as a large success also in terms of, let's say, bringing kind of a new way of life, modern living, modernist living to the houses of everyday people, because it was also affordable. In the Netherlands, there was Goed Wonen. That was in the new kind of modernist architecture. These interiors were created as advice to the people living in those new interiors. These were the first houses that had showers, had all these modern technologies that were more healthy, had more light. So the design was seen part as a kind of holistic idea to have a better life, and also in a kind of socialist way for more people. What was interesting, there was also examples of what was bad living or slecht wonen. So you see this one on the right. This is a working class interior from, let's say, what was normal in the 30s and even in the 40s and 50s. A lot of upholstery, carpets, a very dark kind of interior. And this, of course, came from on the left, you see a working class interior in a souterrain in Amsterdam, where people had very small houses, bad ventilation, no central heating. So all of these things. So it was also a kind of emancipation, right? But I think it's important to understand that good design was first and foremost a marketing instrument, right? So this exhibition was organized not only with the designers like Eames, but also together with this merchandise mart. Because it was also important to start sell this furniture and give a boost to the economy of the United States. So after the MoMA, the exhibition actually toured around and also went to a lot of these shops where people could buy the furniture. There was even a political aspect to it because the State Department was involved, where they wanted this exhibition to go around all of the world to show that, you know, in contrast to, let's say, Soviet design, design from the United States could be very affordable and, let's say, very well developed and very tasteful. So it was, although good design is often regarded as this moment in time when modernist design was introduced to a bigger audience, it was also a marketing event, and it was also a political event. And it was actually affordable because in this time, an Eames table was $75. And now, of course, you know that if Eamstable is very expensive. At Vitra, you have to pay 1,800 euros for it. So you also see the way that design has, this kind of modernist design has kind of moved throughout time, that it now has become luxury items. And of course, today, with IKEA, modernist design has become, let's say, the standard. IKEA has kind of democratized a lot of modernist design, making it affordable and even a throwaway. And this is actually a campaign from IKEA themselves, being kind of ironic about the throwaway culture of IKEA furniture. I mostly see IKEA furniture on the streets because it's, of course, so cheap that it's cheaper than to throw it away than to fix it up, or let's say sometimes even to transport it. IKEA is one of the largest producers of wood in the world. So from this idea where people only had maybe one interior where their furniture came from, let's say 3 generations, now it's actually normal to change your interior like many times in your life at very little expense, which of course has created this issue of wastefulness. So that we have to also regard good design, not only in terms of concept and aesthetics and morality, but also what about the climate and what about the planet itself? Because, for example, now the message is, of course, good design, I think today is often regarded as consuming better. Buying, for example, not a normal SUV like a diesel one, but an electric one. You know, buying an electric car or buying, let's say, organic food and clothing made with organic cotton. But of course, this also is a bit akin to greenwashing, because we also know that the average person in Europe uses simply too much, right? So, for example, if every person in the world would consume as somebody in Europe, we would need 3 planets. So the simple fact is that consuming different is not going to solve the inherent issue of the livability of the planet. So good design, just in terms of changing the aesthetics or the concept of it, or even let's say the sustainability itself, might not be enough. It might be that we have to, let's say, design less and consume less, right? Because we know that despite all of this sustainability, despite all of the climate summits, CO2 emissions have just risen. You know, we're not anywhere near, let's say, a place where we can go to what the Paris Accord has agreed on, which is keeping it 1.5 degrees. So right now we are already at 1 degree. So we are currently we cannot go basically continue in the way that we are going and doing business as usual. So that brings me to the idea of if this is design and this is design culture, if it comes from this kind of history of aesthetics and concept and taste, then what is not considered good design? And maybe it's good for us to also, let's say, turn our gaze to different areas of design and kind of learn from different impacts of other forms of design. Because, for example, what is not considered design is things like craft, or what we call craft, this is from Aboriginal artist making baskets, for example. So often this kind of work would end up in an anthropology museum. So in many places in the world where people don't have access to design education, there's no, let's say, curators, no subsidies, no design institutions, no awards. Basically, many things are not regarded as design, but as craft, or as, let's say, amateur design. And some of this design is based on scarcity, like the Inuit snow goggles that are designed in a culture where there's very little resources, almost no wood. And what they, for example, these really old snow glasses were there before the sunglasses that we know, and they were made from bones. So the very few bones that they had, they would use as a kind of design from a scarcity perspective. The ocarina from Latin America, this one is from Colombia, is very interesting. It's a kind of whistle that has no technology. It's just a whistle made out of clay. I was given a few by a friend of mine. So each of them, they're not only shown as a kind of sculptures, but they're also warning whistles that have a unique sound. So for example, if I am in the jungle and I lose somebody, then I can find this person because this person has a distinct sound, because this person also carries an ocarina. So I found this kind of design also very innovative and creative in its own kind of manner, but in an inherently different manner than maybe that we are used to seeing in award shows. So the question is, of course, why is this not considered design, and why would these things maybe end up in an anthropology museum and not in a design museum. I also think this here from design from scarcity can also be very exciting when people are just being inventive with little resources they have. Me as a designer from the Netherlands, I'm used to design from a moment of abundance. Which colors should I choose? Which papers? Which materials? But it's a completely different question when you have a limited amount of materials and you have to solve a certain thing. And it's important not to romanticize scarcity or lack of resources, because a lot of this design is made from a position of scarcity, but that this is a different kind of creativity that is actually nonetheless, I think, very interesting. And also the way that counterfeiting, which is seen as one of the biggest dangers for the European economy, creates also this kind of abundance of creativity, where they create, for example, in Shanghai manufacturing iPhones that are counterfeit iPhones, but they have actually upgraded them, for example, with dual SIM cards. So I find it really interesting that there's a narrow point between innovation and counterfeiting sometimes. So these are some of the funds from Shanghai manufacturing collected here by Disnovation, who did an exhibition about them. And this all came to me when I was researching my book Capsullock, which is about the relationship between capitalism and graphic design, where I realized that a kind of different way of looking at design, a way that can be more sustainable, less wasteful, and also less exploitative, might not have to do with the aesthetics or concept, but by the social surroundings and economic structures that we ourselves as designers inhabit. For example, I spoke to this collective, Brave New Alps. I interviewed them for my book. So they say they never win awards and their work is not really considered to be very cool or hip. And so it's often aesthetically not regarded as very, let's say, award-winning design. But because they moved to this rural area in Italy where they realized that they could have a better economic and social and ecological impact by becoming like a local economic force. So that, for example, they have workshops with resort printers and power tools, which they share with the community. So they function as a kind of community center. They work mostly with small businesses in their surrounding area, supporting rural economies that in Europe are actually having trouble, staying afloat because of the competition with large multinationals that are putting their big stores there. Also, they are really trying to spend all of their money in small local shops to keep them also alive. So I found it really interesting is that kind of a more ethical or more sustainable form of design might actually have more to do about who you hire, where you spend your money, and how you conduct yourself in an economic and material sense. Dave Hakkens is a Dutch designer who does this with precious plastic. So this is a project about the recycling of plastic. Rather than creating kind of new objects that could be sold for a lot of money, let's say recycled objects, he just came up with a way of coming up with a system where people all over the world can find these kind of standard machines used in many different kind of factories and different kind of material spaces, and to refurbish them to create these plastic recycling businesses. And there are like hundreds over the world right now. This is all stuff that he gives out for free, all of these plans, because his goal is not to be as famous as possible or to sell as much of the design, but that many people can recycle plastic, and we will find a solution to the idea of plastic waste. He also created this work called Fixing Fashion, where he teaches people to fix their clothes, how to take care of your clothes. And we know with the fast fashion today, it's so cheap that, very few people actually take the time to, fix their socks or holes in their clothes. So going from that step away from creating products and only thinking in terms of like new commodities on the market, taking care of the objects we already have and the products we already have can also be a very radical gesture. Sometimes also as a designer, maybe it's necessary to question what is legal. Good and bad can also have to do with legal. So this French designer, she had trouble paying her tuition fees in France. So she had to come up with a way of making money. So she started to distill pastilles. Now distilling is illegal. You have to have a license for this, and it's a very difficult process to get like license for. So she did this illegally in the school. She was selling the liquor, but of course this was illegal. So that's why she designed a mask to protect her identity. And also, it was difficult to get paid. So she devised this system. In art schools often have cards where you can pay for your coffee, but also for photocopies and prints. maybe papers you want to buy. So she used this as a form of currency where people could use these cars to buy this alcohol from her. So I found it really interesting how she used a kind of illegal method, but to kind of create a design strategy that works for the objective that she wanted to achieve. And that she also found her way as a kind of civil obedience to kind of understand also to stretch the space of what design is. This is a very famous example from the 1970s. Silvio Meirelles is a Brazilian designer, an artist who during the dictatorship printed on the Coca-Cola bottles the instructions to make a Molotov cocktail. And Coca-Cola, of course, famously has one of the best logistical systems in the world. So this was for him a way to kind of use a kind of capitalist system of logistics to send out messages of civil disobedience. Myself, I've been involved in this group. They print actually leaflets with Dutch labor rights in, I think, 8 or 12 different languages. Because in Holland, like in Germany, a lot of factories, a lot of industries employ migrant workers, many who do not speak Dutch. So it's very important, and I'm with this group, and they give out these leaflets outside factories to people because often people don't get the protective gear. Often people are exploited. They don't get paid the right amount of money. So it's really important to help them. So for me, this is not just about the design, but it's more about the act of being outside a factory and giving those leaflets to people to at least share the knowledge of better working conditions. I've also been involved in this one. This is Let's Get Free. This is a research kind of a research project together with Metro 54, who's a community art collective about the abolition of police in the Netherlands. So this question about police violence and also what kind of issues we are faced with today are not always best solved with police. And we use design in a way not to create, let's say, representation, but especially about creating using creativity as a way to look into a future where we have less police or even no police. How can that be like a creative and interesting way of thinking about the future? What kind of communities would that create, and how would we keep communities safe, and what would we benefit from that? So that's not seen as that's really seen as a kind of creative effort doing all these workshops. So this is one of the works that one of the designers made, for example, for this reader that we are currently compiling. And what was interesting, because this is about police abolition, none of the funds in the Netherlands wanted to work with us. So you see that even though a lot of things are funded, there's still kind of a limit about what is allowed and what is, let's say, not allowed. Right now in the Netherlands is a very interesting movement with the housing shortage of squatting. Squatting is illegal since a few decades. But yeah, the housing crisis is so strong now, and we have like thousands of buildings empty in our capital. And many of those buildings are owned by investment conglomerates that are elsewhere in the world, who just keep the houses empty so they can, let's say, become piggy banks. They're just there to accumulate capital. They're not there for people to live in. So these empty places are squatted by collectives like Mokum Kraakt and the anarcha-feminist group Amsterdam. But they're not just squatted for housing, they're used for social purposes. So they do giveaway shops, they organize children's workshops, they do movie screenings, exhibitions. So they really make these into social centers. And for me, taking spaces that capitalism basically uses only to accumulate and has no function at all, and then turning them into social spaces is for me a very radical, but also an interesting form that I would also consider even design. Spatial design, but also in terms of events, but also in terms of understanding what kind of value you can give to the community. Other examples that are similar are, for example, the Zone à Défense in Notre-Dame-des-Landes in France, where the occupation of an airport designated area has been going on now for quite some time. And this has created this kind of architecture of scarcity that actually looks particularly beautiful, but would never appear in like an official architecture magazine, perhaps. And this one is Hambacher Forest. I've been there 2 years ago. I don't know what the situation now is after Lützerath, but I found it really interesting, the architecture that is created there by the activists that want to protect this really tiny piece of forest in resistance of this really big brown coal mine. And a beautiful kind of Star Wars architecture that is created with also all these walking routes that are between the trees, and also the kind of braveness of people living in these conditions with very little resources, no connection to sweet water that they have to get from a nearby farm, and only some small solar panels. So I find this really inspiring in terms of, let's say, what the role that design can play in kind of social movements, but also to expand this beyond commodities themselves. And for me, that is inspiring, because not that we have to go to this kind of design, but we can expand design to something that can be for good. And that is not only to commodify or to sell or to create a kind of market, but also to, and this is also the role that has always been played in society, to also mediate kind of social connections in society and also strengthen communities. And for me, that's an exciting kind of way of thinking about design that I'm looking forward to. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ruben, for taking us into your view of good and not so good. So we will now open the panel, open the audience for questions. So in case you have a question, you can just raise your hand and the microphone will come flying to you and you'll be able to ask your question. And while everyone is still thinking, I, of course, have a question to you, Ruben. So, I mean, you do so many things. You're a designer, then you're a journalist, then also it seems like you're an activist. Is there one description that you would give yourself? And also, what is your motivation for doing doing what you do?
Well, I'm just doing stuff like any other person. You know, we are composed of many different identities. I don't think our work identity, also mixes with who we are, and I also like cooking and I like many other things. I like to stay in between disciplines. This is where I feel comfortable. It's not always easy, but that's where I get a lot of energy from. But practically how I pay my rent, which is an important thing, is by teaching at the moment. So teaching is for me something that I really enjoy, but also to being in communication with young groups of designers and hear about their needs and what kind of world they want and to share kind of what I know with them is really, really nice.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. We have a question from the audience. Could you raise your hand once again a little higher? Perfect, thank you.
Hi. I'm not sure if you can see me, Ruben, but I can see you, and thank you for your for your short speech. I read your book actually last year, but the question, since you maybe can't see me, I'm a generation baby boomer. I'm 58. I'm not a designer. Both my parents have been quite active in design. And my father also had a company before he died. That's just my background in case you can't see me. So my question is, I'm very interested in the other kind of design, which is not just very beautiful things for rich people, like my father used to do for a very long time, and I also have some money from there. And I'm very interested in climate change and, becoming more, taking care of what you use, what you buy. And for example, me personally, I've never been interested in cars, but I've experienced that lots of people in Germany here, they just cannot imagine to stop going by car. They just cannot imagine to just try one day to go by, metro. And my question to you is, do you have any ideas how to motivate these kind of people to be a bit more open to this other kind of, the other ideas that you presented and ideas other people have? And because this is really the question that I ask myself nearly every day, how can I motivate those people who are wealthy and they have their everything, but how can I motivate them? How can you motivate them to be a bit more open and try another way of living?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I don't know, being in contact with many different people and also not in a way to, and in an equal level, no? You don't want to assume a kind of moral high ground. That's also very tricky. I think it's always good to be in dialogue. I think it's also important there's alternatives. Now, in many places in the world, also many places in the Netherlands and Germany, public transport is simply not an alternative. And especially people who have families, public transport does not always guarantee, that, and in many countries it's not even possible. So it's one thing to convince people, but if they say, yeah, but the train is too expensive, or I cannot use the public transport to get where I need to be, then I currently live in Barcelona. I'm going to be living here for a few years. If I would come by train, it was first a plan, and I would love to have done that. It takes me 14 hours and it costs 500 euros. And if I take a plane, you can do that for 10 euros, So that if that is the there's very few design schools in Germany when they want to ask me to do a lecture, they say, yeah, sorry, we cannot afford to pay 500-600 euros for the train. So if the train is 50 times more expensive than an airplane, then what do so, and this again is related to the EU laws that were created, and then the agreements in the 1950s that kerosene would not be taxed. So we cannot change these things only in dialogue when we have economic policies in place that just basically push us towards the car, no? So as long as that is still the case, then we can talk amongst each other, and that's very good. But we also need, the states to intervene here.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you for your answer. Is there any other question here in the audience? No other question. With this, thank you so much, Ruben, for joining us virtually, for just sharing your insights, your knowledge, and what you've experienced with us. I think we all really appreciated it. Also, thank you for answering the question, and we wish you a great evening and a good night later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and have a nice evening.